We are now recording. So first, let me ask everybody, like, does anybody just want, like, I don't know, some basic information about hooks? And that's fine. Like, that's cool. Or do we want to, like, get into, you know, something more specific, like Colin was asking for very specific information about how to solve maybe a very specific problem? And I'll need you to speak up if you have any sort of opinion. I mean, like, don't leave me hanging. Answer me a question. Or put it in the chat if you don't want to speak vocally.
I would love to know more about properly using useEffect and dependencies.
Okay, we can definitely talk about that. That's common, and it might lead us to Colin's concern. Okay, so does anybody, and you can just put up a thumbs up or in the chat or anything, does anybody not know anything at all about hooks and they're just kind of here to, like, I just kind of want to see what's going on? And that's cool if you are. All right, well, okay, let's talk about useEffect then. Okay, so everybody knows that, can everybody see my screen just fine? Is it cool? Everything, fonts are fine, size and all that jazz?
Yeah.
When PK says pretty fundamental knowledge, do you mean you're looking for pretty fundamental knowledge, or you have pretty fundamental knowledge? Or you want to talk about pretty fundamental knowledge? You have it, got it. Okay, cool. Barely, sounds good. All right, well, let's talk about what David was talking about in particular. So, like, useEffect. Okay, so I don't know what I was doing here. I was just like, I'm making some stuff up. Let's make some products, and these products will be named Adam and Betty and Chad, because I am so creative with things. Anybody think of a good D word? Oh, I know one. David. All right. I don't know what this is going to do, but we'll find out. Oh, you're in my way, screen. Does anybody find that Zoom, like, the camera thing gets in the way a lot of the time? Import. Let's do, what did I call it? Products? Maybe a product list. Everyone's going to hate watching me type. And it's a new keyboard too, so I'm actually even, like, struggling to find my place. I keep accidentally hitting function a bunch of times when I'm trying to delete stuff. So yeah, you can all enjoy my completely unprepared struggle. It'll be fun. See if we get anything rendering. Huzzah, close. We need objects. Let's call this. When I said totally unprepared, I meant totally unprepared. You can't spell either. You guys can feel free to even, like, leave your sound on if you want, because sorry, leave your microphone on, because I want this to feel more like we're all just hanging out than it is just me doing a talk or something. Anyway, I just wanted to add an E.
This is Colin again. I should mention that while I have a very specific question, I've been doing React for all of the week, so going under fundamentals is good too.
That's cool. I mean, I don't know what fundamental, like, we could go through, you know, all the hooks and be like, this is what you use state for. This is what you use useEffect for. Here's some trickiness with that. Or if you guys want to do that, that's cool with me too. I don't care. Or we can just talk about useEffect right now. First, I want to see why. Oh, that's why. I was like, why was that not working? All right, and now these guys all want, like, objects with a name property. Yeah, I'm done. Prettier, save me now. Anybody see what I've done? Why it's not liking it?
It's Betty.
Betty? Ah, Betty. You son of a bitch. It's always Betty. All right, now I guess we got to add styles. I'm sorry, everyone. I should have prepared something, but you know, it would kind of wreck with the theme if I prepared at all. It wouldn't then be totally unprepared. Everybody cool with CSS modules? Anybody know what that is? Everybody know what that is? I mean, let's say
I've seen them before.
background. What's a nice one? Cyan. And height. Well, let's do product list. Let's do like a product list. Sorry, I'm just. Oh, you guys hate me. I hate me too. If it's any consolation. Product. Let's do like height 100, and let's do like display flex. How do you make it like where it's in flex flow row? Is that it? Sure. What are we going to get here? Let's add some classes. Why would I use the harder styles from? You know what? There's only a limited amount of time. I got to stop screwing around. Sorry. The limited amount of time comes from the fact that I didn't pay for Zoom, so I've only got a 40-minute call before it's going to be like, hey, start again.
If after we want to jump on, I can let it use the Hack Regina one. It's a paid subscription. So
that's what we should have done in the first place. I just was like, I didn't know if anybody but David was going to show up anyway. So. Closer, warmer. Not quite what I wanted. Closer, warmer. And let's add some margin. Cool. All right, whatever.
I'll just say I'm pretty amazed how you were able to do all this just off the top of your head.
Yeah.
I forget CSS so frequently.
Me too. It's definitely not one of my stronger suits. What is it called when you make it in the center? It's like align items center. I feel like there's a one command. If anybody knows like the one command to make it centered.
I usually just cycle through.
Content.
I cycle through align content, align text, align items, center, and usually one of them works.
This is working. This is good. Let's go 33%. Oh, that didn't work. Oh yeah, right. This guy needs to be like display block now because you're a list. And I thought that would do it with auto.
Is there supposed to be a dash in product list?
No.
Or did you remove that?
I removed it, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I'm surprised. Okay, well, I'll go with 100%. Let's see what happens. Nothing. All right. Yay. Okay, this is actually turning into the CSS show, which is fun. Yay, it's the CSS show because I suck. Oh, it is 100. What's going on here? What do you guys not like? Whatever. Okay, I'll go back. All right, I'll stop wasting your time. Let's get back to the, I don't know. I don't even know what's going to go on with this, which is hilarious. And I'm spending this much time doing crap. But you know what? We got to change the font, though. Font. Sans. Better. All right. So, useEffect. So, useEffect, obviously, maybe not obviously, I'll describe useEffect. UseEffect is a hook you want to use whenever you've got a side effect. And so, essentially, the mental model to have is that, you know, hooks are all about function components. And I actually don't even like this style. I like this style better. Const app equals, personally. This is more actually what's happening. And let's go to the, I guess I got to do it this way. Let's do it in this thing instead. All right, so useEffect. Essentially, hooks are about adding state and side effects to an otherwise synchronous render process. So instead of how you might think of it as like a bunch of instances of your component being assembled into a tree and then called render on each of them, which is sort of the mental model you get with class components. Function components are, you basically have a tree of function calls, essentially, and it's just like, I'm going to call these, which are going to call these, which are going to call these, and the thing I'm going to end up with data describes how I'm going to now need to update the DOM. And so these are going to be called, your function components are going to be called whenever React decides, which essentially it is when something in the state updates and something tells it to re-render, which is going to then call all the functions. So useEffect, and that render is synchronous, meaning it runs all the way through before releasing control to like the next tick in the JavaScript engine or whatever. It's going to go all the way through, and I believe it goes bottom to top, but it's unimportant. useEffect is a way to sort of get out of that. So useEffect takes a function as its first parameter, and this function is what is going to be called outside of the rendering process. So there's like, you know, React's going to render, it's going to be all these things. useState is a way to hold on to variables or data in between these render calls specific to this, you know, not instance technically, but sort of instance of the component, meaning like every time product list is called, it's like, hey, this is a new component because it's in this place. And the way it sort of knows that is hooks keep track of where in the tree they are when they call these, and they know that, oh, if I've called, you know, I'm here and I call this hook, I know it belongs to this pretend instance of that hook. That's a little bit confusing, but not important. useEffect is a way to say, okay, now with all the context that I have with this function call and knowing where I am in the component tree, I have to do something outside of this. And so anything that's like asynchronous probably, or anything that is going to do something outside of React, you probably want to put in a useEffect. And that is very wide encompassing. So yeah, it includes a lot of stuff. So this is going to run, basically the timing of useEffect is sort of where you might think of it as life cycles. They're kind of trying to get away from the mental model of life cycles, but useEffect essentially is run after the component renders sometime. And that's sort of like a funny thing, but it's true. It may run immediately after the component is rendered. It may not. It may actually, like React has decided like it's got to do some rendering, churning. There's some waiting to happen. It'll render at some point after, maybe asynchronously, maybe synchronously, this render has run. So you can't really rely on the timing of anything that happens in here. It takes a second argument, which is the most important thing. It's an array of dependencies or inputs or whatever you want to call this. I think they call it inputs. And the difference here is about using your effect to synchronize your state. And so you want to say like, okay, well, what is my state? You know, usually, maybe not usually, but it's often paired with like a use state call. And you want to say like, my component state is currently this. And I want to synchronize it with, let's say, the server or something. It doesn't necessarily have to be like an AJAX call, but it's just like any sort of thing. Yeah. And so if you were to do it like this, without any dependency, then every time this is rendered, this callback function is going to be called every time. So every time this render goes through, sometime after it, it's going to call this. If you add a dependency, that sort of starts to limit when it's going to be called. So now with an empty array, this is like, okay, well, what do I need to sync my state with? What do I need to sync my component state with? And in this case, you're saying, sync it with nothing. I don't actually need to sync this against anything. I just need to call this effect. And so what's going to happen is the first time this component instance, not really, but the first time this component is rendered or called, it's going to call this function. And then it's not going to call it ever again, pretty much. And then useEffect has this other thing. You can return a cleanup function if there's anything you need to do here to clean up if you're like binding to event handlers or something. And this will get called, the cleanup function will get called when the component is, you know, unmounted. Not really, it's the kind of want to get away from mounting and unmounting, but essentially the mental model you can follow is when the component mounts, it's going to call the useEffect, and when the component unmounts, it's going to call the cleanup. That's if you have an empty array saying, I don't need to sync my state with really anything in this component. If it's empty, it'll call the cleanup function, I forgot to mention, every time. So it'll run the useEffect, and then the next time this function is called to render, the next time this component is called to render, it'll call the cleanup first, and then it'll call the useEffect sometime after the render. Both of those things sometime after the render. It's kind of confusing. But. So then you can add things in here like values. So in this case, let's say we got a prop or something that's like ID. Whoops. I don't know. Selected, let's say. Boy, this really messed up. Say like selected. New keyboard. Selected ID maybe. And now we want to say like, okay, I want to do something based on what's selected. And so now I'm going to put this as like an input or a dependency of the useEffect. And so now what this is saying to useEffect is, when you mount, call useEffect. And whenever this changes, I need to synchronize my state. So right now I'm synchronizing my state with whatever selected ID equals. And so I'm going to call this again if selected ID changes. And the important thing to remember, and this is where people get stuck up, is that the way it decides whether selected ID changes or not is it just does a simple equal, equal, equal. And so if selected ID were, you know, let's say selected product instead, and product was an object, then even if this by all value was exactly correct, like exactly equal, if the instance itself was different, then this will be like, oh, I need to rerun. And that can happen to a lot of people. Because what they'll do is they'll do something like this. They'll be like, okay, in app, you know, here I'll say the selected product is, and I'll put like, you know, name Adam here or something. And so now what you might not realize is that by the way this is written, every time the app render function is called here, and every time this component is called, it's going to create a new object instance with a name property, Adam, and pass it as props. So now, hey, we are running out of time. Should we switch to the other thing?
This meeting has been upgraded by the host and now includes unlimited minutes.
Woo.
Do you want to make me the host?
Well, this one just did it for me.
Oh.
It said you just did. It said, hey, we give you free uptime. Nice. Thanks.
And also, Patrick, I'm not going to mute my mic because Adam said not to mute my mic and to make this a conversation.
That's true. I did.
I'm just hearing him move stuff in the background. I'm like, man.
All right.
Your mic.
I also hear that, David. I muted.
Okay.
David, mute your dang mic. I'm just kidding. Yeah, I did want this to, Patrick, I did want this to, I don't know if you're here for the beginning, I did want this to feel more like a, hey, we're all just hanging out, not like me giving a talk or something. So I did say leave the mic unmuted, but of course I didn't realize that David would be so rude. So yeah, I apologize for that. And you know I'm kidding, David. Don't cry again. So see, when he's muted, I can't even tell if he thinks it's funny or if is he off crying again. So yeah, anyway, all I was saying there was, so even though, you know, this looks like, yeah, name equals app, this is going to run every time render is called, because selected, whatever the heck that says, selected product is actually going to be a different object every time. Did I write it both on always? No. Okay. Just because of the way app is passing it in. And that can catch you every now and then, because as dependency. And of course you can add more dependencies here. One complicated thing that is completely unnecessary in my opinion, but whatever, I didn't make React, is that this array, whatever you put in here, the length can't change. So if you have 3 items in here that you're like depending on that you want to change, update whenever any one of them changes, you know, this, that, or the other thing. If any 3 of these things is not equals to the time it was run last time, then this useEffect is going to run again, and the cleanup may run if it has already run once. It always has to be 3. So if you're going to put an array in here, like, you know, oh, I've calculated all my values of some sort. If the array length changes, it gets screwed up, which is too bad, because I've found uses for that. And so in this useEffect, because what you return is a cleanup function. If you do async here, like let's say you make this an async function, this is going to give you, well, oh, look at that. It's going to give you a little, I don't know what's going on there, actually. I think that's actually just a warning of what I was about to say. It must be.
I was going to say you can't do async effects.
So essentially what the idea here is, you're not returning a cleanup function anymore. This, because you did async functions always return a promise. Even if you don't return anything, it always returns a promise. And so useEffect can't take a promise as the result of that callback. So you got to do async in kind of a funky way, which is like, well, there's a bunch of different ways to do it actually. But you could like define an async function in here and then immediately call it. So you could be like async, you know, whatever your async function is, and then immediately call it. You know, you could do like this cool syntax. And then you could do a wait in here, whatever. Or you could just like assign it to a variable, you know, like const my thing. And then you can just call it. That's like essentially the same thing with a variable. Get out of there, little guy. Did I do something wrong? Thing is not defined. I know. It was an example. Jeez, Islint. Get off my back. And so this is kind of an important note that maybe is going to get to what David was talking about originally, is if you use anything in a closure here, so like let's say I just have like const middle equals Leo, I don't know what that means, and then I use middle in here somewhere, my thing, this is going to maybe cause you trouble, right? Because you don't know when this effect is actually going to be called. This is going to be called like sometime after this render, but because middle was defined outside here, it's kind of caught in a closure. And so this, when this is called, whenever that is going to refer to middle, whatever the current value of middle is. And so if middle changes because of another render, before this gets a chance to be called, there could be trouble. And so that's why in this case, you'd want to put it in your inputs. You'd want to put it like anything you're going to like use as a closure, you want to put it in there. So now it knows like, okay, cool. I know to recall this when middle changes, if middle changes for any reason. And I guess I should have maybe used state to make this even more clear. The state can change based on something in this case. Does that make sense? So now, what can we talk about that's like a real example instead of just made up names with foo and state? What troubles?
No, I felt the same way. Like
Adam, I don't know if that's like a direction you want to go, but I was just thinking, oh, but what if I want to use my thing in multiple use effects? So I want to declare it in the body, but it's a function and I know it will never change. So I don't want to put it as a dependency array. I can use something like use callback to work around it.
I mean, it depends on what you're talking. You could use callback. I guess, I mean, if my thing is like really never going to change, you could just define it out here.
Oh, I actually never thought of that.
You know
I always
like,
use callback. Yeah.
Because now you're like my thing just refers to a function now. It's like a thing that's going to be called, in this case, my thing. Let's do my function. My effing. And you know, this is one, you know, you can think about it in terms of your mental model is this is actually like an instance. This my effing is an instance of a callable function object. And now, because I've defined it out here, it doesn't matter how many times you call product list, because the only way product list is getting my function is because I'm passing it in up here, as opposed to defining it, you know, in here. If I define, oh, I'll just copy and paste that again. If I define it here, you have to think of this as my FN is getting defined every time this product list is called. And so it's a new function instance. It's like an object that can be called every time this is called. And so the difference there is important because now I'm accessing always the same instance by virtue of a closure, no matter how many like use effects I run in here. They're all accessing this exact same instance. And so that's why you don't need to like put it in these things anymore, because they're literally the same exact instance. If you did equal, 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 they would be true as opposed to before. Does that make sense? That kind of gets more into like JavaScript basics, I suppose, of understanding everything in JavaScript. Well, not true. Everything that's not a scalar value in JavaScript is an object, including functions. They just are very special objects that have a callable property that you can't access. Yeah. And then closures are really important in JavaScript because they're so easy to do. Closure meaning like, even in this function call down here, I access this instance because it sort of holds everything in an outer context for me. So you could pass this function around, which we are doing. We're essentially passing it to useEffect. Somewhere in React code is going to take this function and use it, but you know my function will be available for them no matter what, because the system holds onto it for you. It won't deallocate it or whatever, if that makes sense. If you want to talk computer science, which I don't know. So yeah, what you were saying was you can have multiple use effects, and that's fine. You just have to understand the mechanics behind it. You know, this is going to be called sometime after. You can't rely on the timing. These are the dependencies, whether you need them or not. Oh, this is interesting. Oh, state, right? That's what I need. Because I'm using. I was like, I didn't think it would need anything, but it would need state in this case. Do we need some like console logs to make this clearer? Anything unclear yet, or am I just babbling? Thumbs up means everything's unclear. Got it. I am just babbling. I wonder if I could move you guys to this screen. Oh, that's so much better. Now I can see your faces when I look this way. But my code is unblocked. Actually, I take it back. That's not better. It's just as hard. It's just different.
maybe it's a comment, but I think it's really interesting with it, if you have multiple use effects while they are running async, they do run in order, I believe, starting at the
Right.
top and down.
And that's because of the way hooks work. So hooks, for basics, again, on hooks, which everyone probably knows, hooks have a couple of rules, one of which is you always have to call them. You can't call them conditionally. You have to call them at sort of the top level of your component, because the way hooks work is there's this, every time it's like getting ready to invoke a component function, it says, okay, I'm in this place in the tree, and so this represents this this context, essentially. So you've got this like special component little instance context, and then it's every time you use a hook, well, one of the React hooks at least, use state, use effect, these things, it's like, okay, a hook was called, so I make a little slot for it, and I'm going to hold the state for that hook in this little slot, and then it's kind of like an array, slot 1, and then another hook was called, so I go to slot 2, and another hook was called, and I call it slot 3, and in this case it would put that like callback in slot 2 and the dependency stuff. And then so now next time it knows like it's always this use effect and this use effect in that order, and it can't ever be out of that other order, otherwise it gets all messed up. And so that's why they do run in order, because when it gets back to the time like, okay, we've got time to run these effects now, let's run them, it goes through that list. It goes like, okay, you know, the first thing was state, we don't have to do anything. The second one, oh, it was a use effect, so we call the callback. Essentially, that's why they stay in order, if anyone's curious. And just to give you a mental model of how hooks work, there's literally like a little array that is created to hold all the little state spots for your hook calls. Huzzah. So what are you, David, I guess, what were we having trouble with?
I just wanted to make sure I understood how it worked, because I've been using it for quite a while, but you know, I get that classic ESLint error for exhausted dependencies, and you know, I've been really good at just using ESLint ignore, but but I wanted to know exactly like kind of how it worked under the hood rather than just ignoring things.
And do you feel now you'd know why you would need to not ignore it?
Yeah.
Because maybe I should point out the problem of ignoring it is just that, well, actually, I don't know if I can really articulate this. The problem with ignoring it is that you can end up with some weird state, because your state in a closure doesn't represent what you think it will by the timing of the renders. And that's where it gets weird. But I don't know if I can articulate that any better.
Maybe to toss in, it's also, if you think about React Hot Reload coming now, I think it comes in version 17 or whatnot, it's even more important that the state has to be, that you have to understand what state your components are in, because essentially you're going to change code and it preserves its state. That means just empty array and assuming it will only run once isn't really that true anymore. So yeah, it's kind of important for future versions of React that you really are diligent about that stuff.
Makes sense. I don't think anything is really, well, I guess hot reload, is that what you're talking about? Like React, whatever it's called. Fast refresh?
Fast load or fast refresh, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if that would change anything for fast refresh. Maybe it would. Maybe.
Like I mean, David, I don't know what places are where you get this a lot, but I know my issue is often when I want to load in data. I think it is when I want to load data once on a screen, and the reason I don't, it's kind of hard to know whether it has happened already or not. So a good example is if you initialize your data with an empty array, when you load data, let's assume the new array is also an empty array, then your useEffect just going to keep running, right? If you follow the exhaustive depth thing. So you need to essentially have a workaround, something like I use something like is initialized flag or something like that to help me out. But I think that's like the use case I see the most, especially new React developers, where they put that flag in instead of dealing with it, if that makes sense.
Tell me what. No, I don't
Yep.
understand. Tell me what
So,
flag you're talking about,
Um,
or if there's anything I can write on the
Yep,
screen that would help us
for sure.
understand.
1 second. Create three state variables, essentially is loading. Ignore the error. Just say is loading and create like a data, which is an empty array. Initialize it as empty array.
Okay, so make it like an is loading.
Yeah.
Oops, and data.
And data, sure. And then set loading, set data.
And do we want is loading to be true?
It started with false.
Okay. Oh, set loading.
Mhm.
Loading.
Now, if you create a use effect with a empty dependency array, because we want to execute it just the first time it gets loaded, and then we will fill it out as we go. So let's declare a function, which is like our load data function or something. I would, yeah, it doesn't matter. I was going to declare it within the use effect. Theoretically, it's probably an async function or something.
Okay.
Like const load data. Yeah. And in there, we're going to do a set loading true.
Like we're going to
an actual body. Yeah.
Inside it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Set loading true, then like a 1 second timeout, and then set loading false.
We might want to like change the way we wrote this, but
and then, yeah, and then call load data as the first within use effect. And I guess we should set data within the timeout as well, because really we like like faking an async call, so we should call set data and also to an empty array, because let's assume that we search something and
it got back nothing.
Yeah. So if you run this now, I hope this example makes sense. Let me.
Okay, first we should get rid of all these crazy warnings.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, I wonder why.
Just ignore them.
Yeah.
Oh, that's funny. That's why. Okay, so now.
So I hope this actually makes sense. Okay, load data.
So now let's just like add. Sorry, I just want to like add some stuff here, just so we can sort of visually see what's going on. Let's add a P. Is loading. I'm just going to say loading. Otherwise, nothing. Just for fun. What do you not like thing? Oh, you don't like not having a closing thing. I get that. I get where you're picking up. Oh, saw it for a second. Bazinga, loading, gone. All right, off to a good start. Now let's change products for data. Yeah, okay. And you get out of here, products. Well,
I actually think that's not a good example. Now that
now that we're into it, you've changed your mind?
Yeah, I think so, because I think the issues happen more once we're starting to play with Redux and doing dispatches. And we have, but let me see. Yeah, because this will always be just executed once, and that's fine.
So, I mean, while you're thinking, tell me if I'm wrong, but if I were to set an array that had a global scope inside of my use effect, I would first determine that it actually had the length. Or would you always set
it just
data
depends.
to whatever you got?
I mean, it just depends, I guess. Depends on what you want. Like, it depends on what that result is. You might want to set data again here. By setting data even to a new array, it will re-render everything. Like, if it's if it's literally not the exact instance of data getting set, it will re-render. Maybe you want
right,
that.
but in a scenario,
Yeah.
okay. I was thinking of a scenario where I'm fetching data, but the call fails softly, not a 500, but empty record set. I would check the length of the data that I got before reassigning.
Yeah. And I mean, talking about failure there too, there's a lot of different ways to handle the failure. You might not want to like in this case, this is what I was thinking before, was like, maybe we don't want to load data like this. We probably want to have some way to like handle the error, if that makes sense. Like we might want to be more like load data, then.
I think so. Sorry, I think so. A better example, but I feel like it's a lot to set up. Essentially, if we kind of what James was hinting at, if we array the data actually comes from a global scope, or even just as a prop. So every time it changes, it will trigger a re-render. But if it then again is an empty array, if you essentially want to check, we probably only want to load data if there's no data in it, but you kind of end up with an infinite loop. I don't know. I can't come up with like a basic example without having like, yeah.
I actually have some like, let's save this and maybe we could look at something different here.
Data would be, if data was part of your dependency tree, then that would load infinitely.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you're mutating it every instance conditionally.
Right. Yeah. And like you're triggering off data that is changing.
Yeah. So a good example would be, think about an employee, and you also add employee records within the employee. Well, you need the employee ID to find the employee records. That will change the employee objects, an array within it, and now you will have a continuous re-render.
So I think long story short is that, sorry about the wind, guys.
Okay.
The reassignment of something, I mean, check to see if there's a limited set of conditions you can set the reassignment instead of ignoring the potential for an infinite loop.
Yeah. Maybe I should go back to what I had there before. Is this on here? Is this the one?
I think we are far too gone.
Oh man, where did that one go?
Control Z lasts forever.
There we go. Totally. I should have searched for totally unplanned. I forgot I named it. One thing I find that'll be helpful in all of this is to try, and this is kind of a weird thing to say, but it's helpful. Try and not think about the timing of things. Try not to think about like, okay, this changed, so then we fetch, then we do something else, and then we display. Try to more think about it as like state syncing. So it's like, okay, in this case, data has changed of some sort, whatever initiating data, maybe the ID has changed, which now I need to sync with ID. So I'm going to put it in here, which will cause the, fetching to happen and the state to be synced. And now it's showing like just the ID of whatever it was. And if you think in terms of that, I find you'll run into less problems than if you think like, okay, so they changed the ID. So now we need to refetch the data. When we get that data, we're going to reset the state. I just find if you think like, everything is going to happen synchronously except for what's in this useEffect. And this useEffect serves only one purpose, and that's to set the state of my component based on some sort of input. I just find that's a way to model it, if that makes sense in your head. That'll help you not hit like infinite loops and whatnot, if that makes sense. Try and get the timing of things, and then like even like, oh, and then I click on something which will cause the fetch and whatever. It's like, no, the clicking on something will probably just change, a state of some sort, and then because of that state, now I will resync my state with the server because somebody changed an ID. I wonder if I should make an example of that to make that maybe more clear. Let's do this like, let's do get product details. Sure. Tell me if you guys are like, screw off, Adam, stop. Don't keep doing this. And it's going to take an ID, and I'm going to basically say that I'm going to fake this service. I'll say products find where p.name is equal to ID. That's that dang thing where the delete key is not where I expect it to be. And I guess we could just even await. What I'm doing right now is just making a sleep, essentially like an await. That's just going to like wait a second for no good reason. Okay, so, and, oh yeah, actually, I want details. So I don't just want that product. So I need to find the product, and then I want to like get its details. Details. Which is kind of funny. Okay, so pretend that doesn't exist up here. And I'll add some details in a sec. But so we'll say, you know, we'll leave that for that. Let's do this as like selected product and set selected product. And start it out with no. And okay, so we're still going to list through our products here, just because I don't want to go to the time of writing anything else. Okay, so let's just get set selected product working. Does on pointer down work? Probably. Why aren't we all using pointer things instead of clicks, by the way? Should be in like every single demo should be using pointer events instead of clicks, because they're supported like across browsers, and they are better than clicks in like every way. So just a thought. And so let's add a class based on this. We'll say like class name is equal to either if selected equals this, selected product is equal to this product. Isn't this awful watching somebody type like this? I can't stand it either. I can't stand myself.
Need more mechanical.
I just hate myself. Just kidding. Self-deprecating
Next
humor
week
never
will
gets
be
old.
therapy.
I wish I could type like hackers do on TV. Like it's just, they're so fast and clicked. Anyway, just want to make sure that this worked. Didn't at all work. That's hilarious. Why? What's going on? What did I do wrong? Oh, class names twice. I need that class names library. I guess I could import it, but I'm not gonna. Seriously? Still don't work?
Should be using stock components.
You use, yeah, I know, style components rule, actually.
Oh
Okay.
man, I'm so addicted to styled components now.
What's wrong with this? Anybody? What have I done wrong here? How come this is not working? Order of operations? Oh, yeah, okay. Fool. I have no farthing to flick. Still not that, though.
Could you put that in the string template, maybe?
Yeah, for sure. And should even. And I will. But why is it the selected part of it not working? Anyone? Anyone?
I'm on mobile phone, so I only have a limited view of the. Oh, what's right next to that question mark after product? The ternary. Oh, space selected.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Well. Okay.
I
Don't make me. Is this actually?
wonder if that should be a double bracket, or
Don't make me open the inspector. It is selected. Dang me and my. Is it seriously?
just your CSS.
Just needs an important after the yellow.
Why would that be that way, though? I am selected. Class is, oh, right. Anybody see what it is? I see what it is. This is a CSS module. You can't just use selected like this. You got to know what it actually is. So it's got to be like, space plus styles dot selected. Now it'll work. Yeah. Fool. All right, where was I? Before I let myself get all tangled up in this. All right, use effect. Okay, so we'll say like, okay, what did I do? We'll say like, okay, so when I select something, I'm gonna like fish around for it, and then we're gonna set some product details or something. So let's make another state here. Product details, which obviously doesn't make any sense, but whatever, it doesn't matter. Details, which will also start out as null. Product details. Nobody hates me more than me. Get out of there. Oh, frick. So every time I go to delete quickly, I hit F13 a bunch of times, and it brings up a thing that says, do you want to turn on dictation? Every time. Because I'm not used to it. Okay, anyway. Product details. And now, so we want to say, okay, when our selected product changes, then we will, this is async, so we're going to do something like, oh well, what's a fun way to do this? I guess we could just do it like this. Get product details, and then we need this selected product ID, which we don't have, but we'll just say name. And then we'll say.
So that was the part that I might have missed because I was late, but everything inside of a useEffect is async by default?
No, not at all. It's not async. And in fact, you can't even make this function async without it causing an error.
Because it itself returns the promise.
Yeah.
Okay,
So, no.
so there was just possibly a typo in the code
Earlier?
Never mind.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah.
I had an await in there maybe that shouldn't have been. Is that what it was? Most likely.
You had an async function defined outside of the useEffect statically, but was calling it without an await inside of useEffect, but not with any promise.
Yeah, it
Like-
probably got messed up.
I don't know. The terminology is escaping me at the moment.
And James, you can do that, hey? Like, so if you want to do an async function, you can declare it outside and just call it from a use effect. But just don't expect that you can await it, right?
Okay, so
So-
you're gonna call it and let it deal
I
with
mean-
its own, because probably that was just doing something
I mean, I could do this.
without a return value.
I could do
Yeah.
this.
Kind of like that.
If this is what you mean. I can do like a wait here. And I'll assign it details. And then I'll like,
I wouldn't even know how to hoist that.
details. All right, so what does it not like? It does not like not having an equal sign. That's true. Now, what else does it not like? Cannot read name of null. Makes sense. Doesn't want to read null. So I'll say if selected product, do this. Otherwise, don't do nothing. All right. So then, so this is sort of like an iffy, an immediately invoked function expression, which is just like I defined a function and then I immediately called it, which is just a thing you could do. The other way to do that would just be like, you could just do go equals, I could just assign it and then just call go. Oops. This is like functionally exactly the same as doing that. And so if I'm not mistaken now, it should say loading for, whoa, undefined is not a promise. You're not a promise. Undefined is not a promise. I guess we didn't do any of the waiting either. Set loading true. Then set the details and set loading to false. Again, we're not handling any error conditions here. What was the error that showed up? Await new promise. Oops. Loading. And I didn't have any details. Let's add some details. Cool, awesome, so, super awesome, super awesome. All right, you reset because you should be null. All right, so now Adam is cool, Betty is awesome, Chad, so has details. And now if I go duk, 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 what happens? Yeah, exactly. All that jazz. Duk, 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 duk. So one thing we're not really taking account to here is, well, there's two things. One, we're not cleaning up anything. So really, we should be like, you know, figuring out how we want to cancel this and putting in some sort of cleanup. And there's a bunch of different ways to do that, but essentially like you want to figure out how to cancel like this asynchronous effect and be like, I don't, you know, even if you can't cancel it, if it's already in flight or something, then you can say like, I don't want to update if this is no longer the actual one. And you want to return that cleanup from this return. You want to return that cleanup from this callback. Should we do something like that right now? Or does everyone kind of get that?
I would like to know when a cleanup runs.
So the cleanup is going to run right before the useEffect callback is going to run, except for the first one, if that makes sense. And then it'll also run on unmount. So depending on what's in this thing will depend on how often it runs. But the cleanup runs sometime, just like when the useEffect callback runs, it'll run sometime after the render function is called, maybe synchronously, maybe asynchronously, but it'll be run before the callback function is called. So your unsubscribe, if you were subscribing to an event, will happen before this happens. And I think it's immediately before, if I'm not mistaken. It's like immediately and synchronously before. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I guess it would like sort of cause another render just before.
It won't cause another render. Like, there's nothing in the cleanup that will actually like cause product list to re-render. But by virtue of the fact that product list has rendered now, you know, after the first go, so let's say it runs once. Let's just get rid of that for a second. Something's weird there. Actually, what didn't it like? Clean up. Console log effector. So it'll run once. Let's get it running immediately, actually. Effect runs because there's nothing to clean up yet. Nothing has changed yet. So now when I click on Atom, the selected product will change, which will indicate like, oh, hey, this useEffect needs to be rerun. So before it runs, it'll call the cleanup from the first render and then immediately run the effect. So right now we should see, it'll say effect, then cleanup and effect. And it does. And then if I don't have any unmounting here, but if I were to unmount product list here, you know, let's just say, well, anyway, I won't go to the tedium of typing it out, but if I were to say something that would unmount this, like take it away if this was dependent on a different state or something, it would also run cleanup when this unmounts. So there's sort of like the initial one, the effect is run without cleanup, but then right before any other effect callback is going to be run again, it'll call cleanup first, then the effect. Cleanup first, then the effect. And then when the component like unmounts, it'll call the cleanup. Does that help with the mental model of the timing of it?
It does. What do you want to do in the cleanup in this particular example?
In this particular example, yeah, I mean, this is a weird one because we don't have anything to go with, but the idea here would be like, okay, well, I've got this async function, get product detail. Does get product detail give me a way to change? No? Okay, well, then in this case, I've got to do something myself. So I've got to say like, okay, let's store something. Let's say, does the So we know that this is going to run and this is going to await. And so we basically have to check before calling these set states, or at least this one, we got to say like, is this still the selected product? What were you going to say, David?
I was going to say like, probably the ideal situation would be like if you're making an HTTP request and having an abort controller ready and just like canceling the request on that.
Yeah.
That's like the first thing I'm going to go back and do is make sure that I got all those are set up properly, just so, you know, it's cleaning up. If you switch pages, it's not still making that request.
Yeah.
Does that sound right?
Absolutely. And I think I have an example of that here somewhere. I know I tweeted it once. It just depends.
But you wouldn't set one of your state variables in a cleanup.
No. No, I wouldn't. I do whatever I need to clean up, I would clean up only from inside the useEffect callback, essentially. So if I set up any listeners there, that's where I'd want to call it. Or, you know, in that case, I want to call my abort controller in there. What is this?
Okay, that makes sense.
Oh, this is using useEffect. That's not going to help us. If you use RxJS, for example, get JSON, you get a subscription, and if you return that subscription, which useEffect does, it'll unsubscribe for you automatically. But that doesn't help illustrate the point right now, but RxJS is great for that. I feel like I had an example of it somewhere.
I got to bounce, but
Okay.
thank you so much, Adam. This has definitely been beneficial. I super enjoyed this. Cool.
We should definitely do these more often. I mean, if nobody's minds just the outrageous amount of and like poor typing, we should do this more often. Yeah,
for sure. And definitely we can leverage the Hack Regina account, so then we don't have to worry about
the thing. Yeah,
time limits.
I'll definitely do that next time. I'll get you to set it up for me rather than doing it myself.
Well, I'm pretty sure I could just schedule a meeting and then just allow anybody to join. And even if I'm not there, I think it just makes me as the host. Yeah.
Cool. Let's do that then. I guess we should probably all call it a day. It's been over an hour. And I suppose I have to work this afternoon. So thanks, everybody. Hopefully this was not completely useless. And let's do it again. Heck, I'm even up to do it again next week, if we can. So yeah, groovy. Let's call it a day, folks. Thanks for everybody's time.